General Motors has made a lot of stupid decisions over the years, but declaring war on smartphones has gotta be the dumbest one yet. Maybe not as dumb as commercializing tetraethyl lead as a fuel additive, or the swing-axle rear suspension of the Corvair, or fighting against a mid-engine Corvette for as long as they did, or the unmitigated disaster of the ignition switch recalls. But it's got to at least be as dumb an idea as the Pontiac Aztek, but without any of the quirky black sheep charm of the Pontiac Aztek. Case in point, although the company earlier announced their intention to discontinue Android Auto and Apple CarPlay compatibility in their electric vehicles, it's since been confirmed by GM's CEO and their chief product officer that the plan is to extend this to gasoline-powered cars as well, in favor of an alternative that honestly doesn't sound great. What does GM plan to do about smartphone projection in their cars? Are they really just getting rid of it altogether? Well, the reasons for doing this are as numerous as the reasons for why it's really dumb to do this. So let's get into why General Motors is making this choice, and why this just might be the worst idea GM has ever had.
Roman report at the end of the month, and I make what I want when I feel like discussing cars.
In 2023, GM announced that Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support would be discontinued on all new electric vehicles, and it led to some discontent among consumers, even as brands like Rivian and Tesla have illustrated that the lack of those features might not actually be a deal breaker for some. However, it seems like GM is taking things a step further. On October 22, 2025, so just last week, General Motors CEO Mary Barra and Chief Product Officer Sterling Anderson appeared on The Verge's Decoder podcast for an interview with journalist Nilay Patel. When defending the decision to remove Apple CarPlay and Android Auto support from EVs, Patel would ask Barra if we should expect that new gasoline-powered cars would no longer have smartphone projection. To which Barra responded, quote, "As we get to a major rollout, I think that's the right expectation. Yes." End quote. So what's going to replace these smartphone projection technologies? Well, in its place will apparently be an original proprietary human-machine interface powered by Google's Android Automotive operating system, but with General Motors' own native app store, cloud navigation, and even their own voice assistant to help you realize your Knight Rider dreams, except with a car that won't be as cool as a Pontiac Trans Am, because GM took that brand out behind the barn and buried it deeper than generational trauma. Now, this centralized computing platform that's supposedly going to make Apple CarPlay and Android Auto obsolete won't be around until 2028, but General Motors is hoping that consumers will warm up to the idea, considering all the stuff that this system is supposedly going to be able to do. It's basically going to provide, quote, 10 times more over-the-air software update capacity, 1,000 times more bandwidth, and up to 35 times more AI performance for autonomy and advanced features. End quote. Which all seems like a set of vague promises that don't actually appear to promise anything in particular. It kind of just seems like a way to get people on board with an idea that they will have an instinctual revulsion towards. In fact, GM is already taking so much negative publicity over this that they had to issue responses to outlets like Top Speed and Inside EVs to clarify that Android Auto and Apple CarPlay support isn't going to disappear overnight, and they're not removing it from existing vehicles that already support it. So I guess it's not really cause for concern in the current moment, but I'd be lying if I said I was all that optimistic about what this would mean for GM's future. Although to their credit, they do seem serious about trying to make this work, investing more in AI tech and robotics and all these other things that will help them be on a level playing field with other tech-forward companies. But will that actually work? The collaboration with Google isn't all that surprising since GM is already implementing Google's Gemini AI assistant into their vehicles beginning in 2026. But what is surprising, at least to me, is that GM would take this kind of risk now, at a time when critical consensus would tell you their current lineup needs all the help it can get in terms of bringing in consumers. And I suppose it all loops back around to the central question here. Why do this? Why make this decision to remove two of the most popular features in the automotive industry right now? Features so popular that approximately 1/3 of consumers refuse to buy a new car that doesn't have them. Well, it's easy to say that the reason is money. But it likely goes deeper than that, because it's not about making money now. This decision is more about making money in perpetuity. At least, that's my read of it. Case in point, the Q3 earnings report just came out, and it shows that while the company will take a $1.6 billion hit due to the production costs and the lack of profitability from their electric vehicles, they're making up the difference in other ways. Writer Michael Frank, in his article on this issue for Top Speed, would report that, quote, General Motors' Q3 earnings showed the car maker has made $2 billion from software so far this year, with $5 billion in deferred revenue via subscriptions from 11 million OnStar customers and 500,000 Super Cruise customers. End quote. So yeah, money, it's what makes the world go round, for better or worse. But to say that this is simply about money is too simplistic, because really, when you break it down, it kind of seems like this is about control. Look, GM isn't saying this push towards a native human-machine interface is about building a platform for charging subscriptions for features. But how is this not simply a platform for charging subscriptions for features? Because if you're going to get people to pay you money for an integrated navigation system, you need to make sure they can't simply cast Google Maps from their phone. At least that's the idea, right? And sure, you can get a dash mount for your phone and use the navigation app of your choice that way. But then, you won't be able to enjoy premium audio, or have access to location services, or battery health analytics. You won't have streaming integration, you won't have charging stop routing, or performance modes. It's addition by subtraction. Removing freedom limits choice and funnels everyone through the same microtransactional channels. It's all a bunch of anti-consumer BS because it's more cost-effective to just build a new interface than to build a better car. You know, I may not be Mr. Know-It-All when it comes to the process of automotive production, but I really don't see what's so hard about making a car that isn't depressing enough to make you long for the stony silences of a neglectful parent. Could you at least design a car that doesn't look like a dropped birthday cake? Oh, how I can't wait for AI assistants to sound just like all those other AI voices whose tone I can only describe as a pillar of the community whose hard drive needs to be confiscated yesterday. And look, I don't care about this because AI is going to affect my driving experience. I'm too broke to have that experience without one of you fine viewers volunteering a car to be reviewed. No, I care about this because if this goofy, numb-nutted plan works for GM, it could have larger implications for the automotive industry as a whole. And yeah, it's probable that the automotive industry heads in this direction anyway, because they need to monetize the experience of car ownership to compensate for a thinning consumer base. But it all just feels so painfully cynical. It seems automakers anticipate that before long, the main draw of a car won't be the driving experience or the utility of any particular vehicle, but the level of integration it has with the consumer, and the degree to which the car can be transformed into a sort of second home that is both fully customizable within the boundaries of the technology provided and a bank account that can subsidize that customization, yet hilariously limiting in terms of what you can actually do with the car, since it's going to be running on an operating system that you're probably going to need an authorized specialist to deal with. Things are going to inevitably break, and as we've seen with any Tesla that needs a headlight bulb changed, you're probably going to need to replace entire assemblies, and cheap repairs are suddenly going to become prohibitively expensive, because it's proprietary tech that requires special tools and coding and all this other stuff that you wouldn't have to deal with if you were just driving that ancient Pontiac Aztek, and all while you're paying a monthly fee for the privilege of getting to have the sort of power delivery promised by the engine that's equipped. We're probably less than a generation away from having a GM executive just stand in your driveway right next to your car like a bathroom attendant waiting for a tip. Except I'd argue the bathroom attendant is far less pushy and way more deserving than any self-glazing, golden parachuted synergy merchant in corporate America right now. You could argue that cars have always been a perpetual vending machine because of things like gas, maintenance, repairs, and upgrades. It will always cost money to own a car. A cost that extends beyond whatever you paid to acquire the car in the first place. But this right here borders on ideological arson. It's lighting a match and tossing it onto the conceptual freedom that cars are supposed to represent, by locking functionality behind a paywall so tall that the dumbest rich people in the world are going to see it, decide to hire a few Sherpas to navigate, and then go and die trying to climb it. And yeah, I know that I'm putting the cart way before the horse here. GM hasn't said anything about using this interface to charge people for subscriptions, and maybe I'm the cynical one for assuming they're going to do that. Oh ye of little faith and all that. And as I've stated before, Tesla and Rivian have managed just fine without Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. And hell, Volvo is running on Android Automotive, and even then you can still use smartphone projection on those cars. But then that makes this even more obnoxious, because GM theoretically could create this integrated AI system while still allowing smartphone projection, but they're just choosing not to do that. But never mind obnoxious. It gets downright sinister when you consider the data implications. When you subscribe to, say, Spotify and project it through your car, the automaker isn't the one who's getting that user data, it's going to Spotify. So a native interface means that the automaker is the primary recipient of that data and can use it in any way they see fit, provided they get you to accept whatever terms and conditions they require for you to use that software. I've talked about this earlier in the year about how automotive tech can be used for all sorts of different things, from reporting on your driving to insurance companies to trying to find other ways to monetize your car ownership. And this would be an escalation of that, because I can't imagine you'd be able to turn off or bypass any of these systems without bricking your car and making it about as useful as a turn signal on a Dodge Caliber that's sitting on cinder blocks. GM has already faced lawsuits over how they collect and use data. And hey, maybe they'll learn their lesson and be a bit more responsible about this. But I don't find it entertaining or useful to hold one's breath, so I'm not gonna do it. And maybe this is just my own poisoned, cynical brain thinking things through, but is pairing with Google an attempt to push Apple out of the car market? I mean, CarPlay Ultra is here, and I could see Apple going further into car integration so that we have warring car companies with their own warring interfaces so that we're this much closer to Skynet becoming self-aware. When I said I wanted to live in the future that movies promised us, I didn't mean Terminator. Now, why is all of this a bad idea? And in my opinion, at least. And what are the implications for the wider automotive industry? Well, at least for the industry, there's every possibility that more automakers will hop on this bandwagon and go with native human-machine interfaces. In fact, it's probably inevitable. But if GM is successful with their approach, we could see all of this accelerated, so that your phone stays in your pocket where it's supposed to, but the infotainment system you get in its place isn't necessarily more convenient or intuitive. But even if it is a success for GM, it still feels like it'd be a net negative for the company in the long term and for consumers in perpetuity, because this has the characteristics of a war against the poor. Hell, not even a war against the poor, but just a war against your average citizen. A Kelley Blue Book report from earlier this month noted that for the first time, the average new car price has topped $50,000. The average price! We're not even talking about on the high end here. People simply aren't going to be able to afford these cars if things continue as they are. And now you're going to create a system with the potential to be even more expensive. Even if they never charge a single dime for any subscriptions, a proprietary technology like this is going to be built into the price of the car, as well as into the cost of repairs, because again, no system is perfect. Things will go wrong. But in my opinion, there are other reasons that this is a genuinely terrible idea, and chief among them is that General Motors is kind of fighting the wrong battle here. The problem isn't the tech, it's the cars. Maybe they're good, maybe they're trash. Most will never know because the cars GM is making right now aren't cars that appeal to enough people that they want to find out in the first place. You can try and talk people into the building with promises of advanced technology that turns their car into a rolling data center, but the car still has to be good at the end of the day. And in addition to fighting the wrong battles, GM is learning the wrong lesson from brands like Tesla and Rivian. You see, those companies can get away with not having Android Auto and Apple CarPlay because they never really had them, so they're not taking away something that the consumer initially had and replacing it with their own in-house system. But the other reason that they can get away with it is because the idea with those companies was that you weren't really buying a car, you were buying a software platform. You know, they're not historically hardware driven the way GM is. So in addition to infuriating their existing consumer base by going whole hog on native tech, General Motors is facing the challenge of convincing people they can be trusted not to screw it up. And hey, that's what Google is likely there for, along with Chief Product Officer Sterling Anderson. Anderson developed and launched the autonomous trucking company Aurora Innovation way the hell back in the ancient year of 2016. Yeah, it's been a very long 9 years. Yet he's probably best known for leading the development of the Tesla Model X. Basically, this is a guy who knows his stuff within this particular realm. And as he displays in the Decoder podcast, which I've linked in the description, and which I encourage everyone to go check out, because there's so much more information than I have the time to provide here, he has big goals with this interface rollout. It's ambitious, and it might actually have been better received if it were happening at a time when GM was in better financial shape. But it's crazy work to do this when you're in a downturn. Granted, some would argue that's exactly the time to swing big, since you have nothing to lose, and as history has shown us, the government would probably just bail them out again anyway. But GM has sort of backed themselves into a corner with this because there isn't really a clear exit plan with something like this. You invest hundreds of millions, maybe even billions, into this new interface, and the cars don't sell any better than they did before. Okay, now what? You can't just go back to Android Auto and Apple CarPlay without admitting defeat very publicly. That's going to be as big of a black eye on public perception as getting rid of smartphone projection to start with. Of course, I have every confidence this interface will be part of a broader platform that encompasses things like hands-free or even no-look driving. But that feels like the sort of thing that will require larger structural changes in society than GM could really do anything about. For all that Barra or Anderson might say about how this streamlines the user experience and how a more integrated system can decrease the amount of distractions people face from having to interact with a phone while operating their car, I'm not sure automation is the answer to this problem. Will it be safer because you don't have to look at your phone to do things? Sure, probably. But that statement being true relies on technology acting in a way technology traditionally hasn't. It needs to work right on release. I have my home lights running through smart home tech, and sometimes you have to tell the damn thing 2 or 3 times to turn off all the lights before it'll listen, because it acts like a middle schooler who pretends not to have heard you when you tell them it's time for bed. And while this is annoying at home, it'd be downright dangerous on the road. Maybe you have an accent. Maybe you have a lisp. Maybe the system doesn't understand what you're trying to say, and now you have to take your eyes off the road to double-check the GPS because now it's trying to redirect you to Pottsville instead of Pottstown. Or maybe you ask it to play The Impossible Dream by the New Hope Theater, and it responds by playing Dream Theater. I don't know. The point I'm trying to make is that we need this system to actually be as holistic and as reliable as this system could possibly get right off rip. And I don't know that a 2028 timetable is enough runway to get there, although presumably GM has been working on this longer than just this year. And look, I get that technology is constantly evolving and things have to be patched in, patched out. There are going to be over-the-air updates. It's like science or art in that it's never really done. There are always improvements that can be made, but it also feels like Generation Alpha might as well be renamed Generation Beta, because they'll be turning driving age when this technology rolls out. And these are the people who are going to grow up testing these systems out for these corporations. They're going to be the ones working out the kinks so that the next generation can enjoy these features in the way they were originally supposed to. But then living means existing in a world where technology rarely ever seems to work in the way it's promised or intended to right off the bat. This is about more than just Apple CarPlay or Android Auto. It's about control. It's limiting freedom under the pretense of expanding it. And you could argue that people hate change, and that's the main reason they're against this. They like the devil they know. They like the systems they're used to. And as Sterling Anderson said on the podcast, when people were introduced to flash storage, they resisted it at every turn. And he's not wrong. People have a resistance to new technology and things they aren't familiar with. It's natural and understandable, even if tech companies don't always like that people have that initial resistance. But Steve Jobs and other tech executives insisted that this was the future, and the public had to get on board. But it's a huge risk to tell people that they have to get on board with something that you might not be ready for any more than they are. Granted, I don't know all of what GM knows. I can't know. I'm just some guy on the internet. But what I do know is that it just doesn't feel like cars need this. It doesn't feel like consumers need this. And as the experience of driving is pushed further towards a planned obsolescence, car culture itself feels like it's going to be subordinate to software engineering, to being drawn in by all the latest apps, by all the latest technology. I don't need to be able to have food delivered to my car. I don't need to be able to have a conversation with my car, even though, yes, I grew up wanting a Knight Rider style future. I'm 40. What do you want me to say? But those things only really have value if they're wrapped around a car that feels like it was a car first, rather than as a platform for tech bros to show out. Maybe GM will surprise all of us. Bigger risks than this have paid off. But this does feel sort of like a bellwether for a changing of the automotive landscape. But by focusing on integrative tech rather than making cars people actually feel excited about driving, it comes across as just doing a bunch of side quests rather than finishing the main campaign. And in much the same way as the video game industry has seen, I'm not sure that consumers benefit by automakers becoming more like EA. However, I also expect that once these systems release, they're going to be the hottest thing in the world for at least the first 6 months. Because that's just what new technology does. It gets you excited because it's new, it's cool, and it's hard to imagine anything being more advanced than what you have right now. But technology always comes with a pretty steep price, both economically and socially. And while this could work out perfectly fine, there's every likelihood that one day your kids are going to have their minds blown, not by how cool the technology is, but how much they have to pay to use it. But what do you think? Are there positives to getting rid of Apple CarPlay and Android Auto that I'm not seeing here? Do you simply not use them and not care about them at all? That's totally valid as well. There are plenty of people who use them and don't use them, and who prefer not to have them. If so, I'd love to hear from you. Is GM ahead of the curve here, or is this one of the worst ideas GM has ever had? Talk to me in the comments, and keep an eye out for my screen name, Limited Time Roman. I love chatting with you guys. And do you love the show? Do you want more of it? Support us on Patreon for just $1 so our channel can continue to keep you well fed with the absurdity of the automotive industry. And check out my 90-minute history video on the outlaw origin of NASCAR, the 22,000-mile race around the world, or the 12-day traffic jam. You can find it all in the bingeable playlist in the description or on the end title card, coming up soon. Like, comment, subscribe, share. It all helps us more than you know, especially hitting that bell icon so you're notified for every video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great rest of your week.